All right, good morning, everybody. Day 3, here we are. Have a good day. Everybody's having a good day? We are here to talk about Automated Lab. All right. So first of all, thank you so much for the sponsors. We got to do our obligatory. We can't be here without going to the sponsors. This is a quick little preview, right? We're going to do Automated Lab. We're going to talk all about what Automated Lab can do and does do. One of the things is that we're not actually going to deploy anything. We're going to look at all the summary reports. So that is also what's interesting about what that's happened, because we can't just kick something off and just watch it, and sit there and wait for the next 10 minutes, because we're going to get across too much information, right? We're going to try and get to too much information. So, who I am, the obligatory, PowerShell enthusiast. I run the Research Triangle PowerShell user group. I am a Microsoft MVP, part-time hiker. You see me in the mornings, but what is Automated Lab? This is what we're going to talk about. Automated Lab, we're going to actually just look at some generic labs themselves. We're going to start simple, then we're going to get some more complex, right? We'll talk about some of its capabilities, how it's kind of frameworked, and then we're going to just show some use cases and go from there. All right? So Automated Lab, what is it and why is it? It is a PowerShell automation framework to build lab infrastructure, okay? It is designed to build a lab from scratch. I think it started off strictly from, here we go. There's a website, PowerShell.org, right? At least one PFE, and the other one, I think he was a Microsoft employee at some point, does it. Raymond's in the room, so thanks so much. Go from there, right? It is primarily designed, or at least I've pretty much used it only strictly for Hyper-V stuff. So deployments, I can take any laptop that's got enough RAM, boom, I got a lab that I can build, right? You can define your lab in code and then just deploy your system from there, right? You can also, it does support, Azure, and we'll see some of that too. And I kind of briefly talked about that just before the session itself on, hey, I need to just deploy an entire lab. I need to deploy a configuration, let that go, and then just tear it all down when you don't need it anymore. So it was a great use case from there. Right? Designer of simple labs. So it has a simple infrastructure, right? There is a structure on how the process works, right? It has a configuration for the pieces it puts together. Here's where all your ISOs go. Here's where your installers go. It's called lab sources, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. And then it has, I guess I should just show it. I'm going to go off cuff because that's always fun, right? So there's a structure. Going to go from here. So it assumes that there is a folder called lab sources, and you put it out there, right? And so we will talk eventually about custom roles and what that looks like. And so inside the code, you can define a role, and this effectively is just code to build out what that role is. You say, hey, I want a lab builder, and it will run all these scripts in here to do that. Similarly, I need an Exchange 2019 box. All right, it will give you there. You can define your own custom roles, and we'll talk about some of that later as well. Right? Actually, come back to this one. Yeah, we'll talk about here. So labs themselves. There is a structure as well. It assumes that all your labs are then going to be. It will put all your labs into a structure. So you can, when getting the configuration of these labs, we're going to talk about a lab definition and stuff. These are all the labs that have been installed at some point on my machine, and so I can just refresh those configurations and what they are in that form. Then the last thing I want to talk to, at least for what's on your machine that's running, is that it will dump all the VMs themselves, right? So what's going to happen, I'm going way off topic here at this point, so I'm off topic, doesn't matter. So it creates VHDs that are the base images of themselves, of the core OS, and then it just differences, right? It creates differencing disks for those machines, so you can have multiple machines all be from the same thing. So it allows you to build from there. All right. Scaling deployments, we kind of talked about that, but we'll actually look at code. That's because that's why we're here. We're always here to look at code. All right. So how do you get it? Install module, automated lab. What does that give you? And we kind of briefly talked about the website itself. What's inside of it, right? And so automated lab itself, it has a bunch of common modules that define a bunch of work. You start from bottom itself. There's some utilities eventually that will come, and I actually know that utility one, right? So I'm going to go from there. Out-grid view, and that's the same thing. Nope, I'm going to skip over. So what does actually a lab look like when you're creating it, straight up, right? Start off, very simple. This is super basic. You define a basic machine and it says, hey, what kind of hypervisor are we running? Hyper-V, all right? Hey, I'm going to define a machine for the lab itself, right? We're going to call it that. How much memory do we give it and which OS we're going to give it. So the available OS types are basically what's available to you. And so we come back to the lab sources, the OSs themselves, and this is the available OS names inside of these ISOs we use. So I can add more and more ISOs themselves. Server 2025, okay, you just add it there, and now it's available in your code, right? So if you bring down the ISOs and you stick them in here, it just comes for free. You don't have to do any extra work to achieve that goal, right? And then you just do an install verbose. You define a lab, you do some work. We're going to do some major work from there, and then it's going to install your lab, and it's going to go from there. And then eventually, it's going to come out and give you a summary of what's going to happen. It's going to bunch of stuff to the console. We don't necessarily have time to actually deploy a full lab. And this is what's going to come back out to you. You're going to get a summary. And it's going to tell you, hey, I deployed one PC. Here's the IP we're going to use. This is the default password that's going to come out of the box. If you haven't defined a password, that's what you get. Some random password out of the box. And then it's really great because it tells you, hey, here's some other things you can do to the machine itself, right? So you can do all this kind of stuff. If we are going to actually, in this demo, we're going to say, hey, we're going to go import the existing lab itself. And I did it verbosely. So it says, hey, it's validating. It went and looked inside that folder that I showed you before with all the labs in. It pulls in the XML, the definition of those labs, and then figures out, do I have all the machines? Do I need anything? What does that configuration look like? So now it has the configuration in memory in the session itself, right? Well, now that I have all that, there are now variables defined for me, and I can do that, and now it's actually, I don't know if it's running. Is it running? No, it may not be running. I didn't do that before. Oh, these are all the machines. So, you know what? We're going off cuff. This is how we do it. I'm going to roll. I forgot to do that part when I was doing my prep here before. So we're going to say here, we're going to get lab VM, because we'll just go get them all. These are the labs we're going to get you. We only did basic, but the next thing right after this is going to say, hey, we're going to add a server to the lab. But we've already done that, and this is with the demo. So what we're going to do, we're going to get them, and we're going to start them all. And we are not going to wait, because we don't need to wait for the VM. So all we did, go get those VMs and start them. And what's going to happen? Hey, let's go look at Hyper-V. Hey, it's booting some machines. Are they up and running? Now that it's running, you know what? We'll go back and use this here. Enter PS session. And so enter lab PS session. So it's going to roll its own PS session for you, right? If it needed to connect to and do remoting for you, it will connect from there. Because it's not up yet, it's probably going to give me a session. But it will work. It will work. All right. What did I want to do with here is that in Automated Lab as well, is there a bunch of stuff that you can do to the lab. We'll kick on some of it. We saw just briefly about get lab VM itself, get the VM itself. You can get the RDP file. So it will use all the information it has and generate an RDP link for you that you can then click and remote right into the machine, right? So it's super helpful in that fashion. And so I often do that. It might be in my history here. You know what, let's just do the other way. RDP file, there you go. Oh, there it is. Get the RDP file for all the machines, stick it inside that folder, and that's what it's from there. We're not gonna do that before, but it's just in my history, what I did before. All right, where are we gonna go? All right, so we kind of talked, we imported the lab, and we added a server to it, right? So we took the definition that we had before, assuming that I did my prep work. This should have been here all by itself, and then it added that server VM itself. You know what? Yeah, we'll go from there. And so now, once you did this new install, we imported the existing definition. Again, we could still modify the lab after we've imported it. So we can create some generic lab and then add some more content on top of it and go from there. Right? Then once we installed, we're going to get a new summary, and it tells me that, hey, this one now ran for 11 minutes. So I added a new server, And if we look back at the old one, hey, it only ran for 7 minutes. So I deployed a basic PC in 7 minutes, but then why did it take 11 minutes to run this time? Well, because what we did, hey, that role that we talked about before, we said, hey, make this a file server. And so the code inside those little scripts there are defining, hey, what's it look like to run this, become this? So add this role to a machine, and now it's going to go inside that folder, figure out all the scripts it needs to run, and run them, add them. And so typically, especially this one, hey, it's going to go use install Windows feature, file and print services, and add all these pieces for you, right? It will do that for you. So there are pre-canned role definitions, and it will go from there. Especially there's root DC, adding a DC to an environment, so you'll see some of that as well. All right, and so now in the new definition, we come here and now there's two some, and hey, it has this role, right? It was a PC in there, and now we added that. Oh, this is the part where we're interacting, and now we actually can actually interface with the lab. So you see we can do some other stuff with it. One of the things that we're going to do is we're actually going to invoke a command on a PC in the lab, right? We're going to tell what its activity is, but it's just some random code, right? Actually, right? So we're going to run code on the remote machine. And let's actually do that. And you see it's doing it. Hey, and it just completed that work, right? So it connected to the VM that was there. I didn't have to know what the IP was. I didn't have to know any of that stuff. It's all inside the definition, and then it used itself to connect to it. Similarly, hey, I can do other stuff, enable RDP on the file server, on the Windows desktop PC. Similarly, go from there and go get those RDP files. And now I can, yeah, there it is. And so it puts all the pieces in you need it for you, right? It defines that, hey, what are you going to log in as? Actually, let's go find what we have. Summit, Automated Lab. Let's go grab that PC. And come on, help me out here. So really quickly, we can just jump into the machine. And I'm not going to wait because I want to keep going. There's so much more to do from there. All right, so that was basic. We took a simple machine, we added some stuff to it, what that kind of stuff. So let's kind of look at what else we can do beyond that, right? So here we are, calling it Home Lab. Just define a variable and we go from there. We can now have other custom like networks. So it's going to use the hypervisor and create networks for you. Do you want that network to be able to talk to the internet? Do you not want it to talk to the internet? Do you want it to have isolated? Some of those things go. When I typically build labs as well, I use this model so that I can splat it and really define what the definitions look like, right? And so then it makes it easier for me to understand what in that lab definition, hey, how much memory do I have? What OS do I have, right? So I'll typically do it that way. Hey, we're going to take the network adapter. What are we going to do? So hey, because it is a DC, we're going to add DHCP later on. Oh, actually, this static, it's a root DC. What's role? We're going to talk role. This will become a domain controller if you ran the whole thing, right? So it's actually in there. Home Lab's there, and it is a domain controller. And we defined what its domain was in there, and it just comes from there. Roll the summary. So this one took 33 minutes to run, and we are certainly not going to do that in a demo, right? But what did we get? We got a lab running using this. I'm going to connect to it using the Wi-Fi network, but it's also going to be directly. Hey, this is the local administrator for the entire domain. It is the domain admin of the entire domain. And here's all my PCs that got deployed in that phone, right? It is the domain controller itself. It also deployed a router. Basically, it is its outbound route, so that I can talk to it, and it has a route to the internet. So it wants to be on an inside, and so we don't break from there. And then just some random PC on that network. So you run these pieces, there are some components, and you get a bigger, but now really, really small, you get a little bit bigger, and then we get some more advanced stuff. Kind of crazy. So we do some more stuff. What does this look like? There's no reason you can't use secret management, So hey, we're going to do this, and what password does it get? All right, well, there's no code, there's no passwords for anything now in my code. It's not going to come out, right? Define our lab. We got a bunch of variables before. We set what the installation configuration is. We defined what the domain is, what those passwords we're going to use, right? So this is before we got some password in here, or as we saw in the more advanced tab, in the summary, it was some pass, but we can define what that password is and we can set it directly so we know what's going to happen. We continue on. This all looks what we normally similar, and I didn't keep that thing. So continue on. This more and more advanced, and now we're going to even next stage, right? We could define our own functions effectively, our own code as far as what we're going to do with this, right? And so what this installation is going to do is then we can install software itself. We can define what software is, where it is from there, and then what happens from there. You know, wait on the job. So what this is going to do is it's a wrapper function for installing some random application. So just know you can define your own functions to do work that you then have automated lab do at this point. I'm probably running all of these. So setting the source location, we've already done that. We're going to use the Citrix lab itself. Hypervisor, define our network that we're going to do. We're going to build a lab in that structure. But here's also the interesting part here. We're going to define other sources. We did an install before and said, hey, it automatically uses the Windows OS ISOs themselves. But now you can say, hey, I can define another ISO to some other ancillary tools. I want to install AutoCAD. Well, where do those ISOs come from? All right, well, you can define the path and then now reference it later on, and we'll see that in a little bit. Hey, PS default parameter values. If you're not using default parameter values, that's phenomenal. But hey, we're going to say, hey, the default network for everything below is now going to use the default lab. The default domain is going to be that there. So later on, when we're actually defining all the servers and the PCs in that configuration, we don't have to give all those details in there. It's just going to happen automatically for free, right? If we have defined it, then we get it, but otherwise it will always deploy server 2022. So if you're doing labs as well, you typically want to use default parameter values and say, hey, these are my defaults for all of these settings, and then inside the individual definitions when you're defining them, you make it break. So the fact that I'm not defining an OS means it will be 2022. And here, similarly, these two machines will be server 2022s. And how many CPUs will automatically happen, right? We're defining into pieces. So what's going to happen? It's going to get a domain controller. It's going to be a router, basically just has routing services turned on, right? We're going to get an app server. So this is the session host that people remote into, XenApp itself. Then this is a Citrix environment, but this is an example of a real working one that we've deployed often. I commented out some of the other stuff that we use, but this is what it looks like to build a more complex lab at that point, right? We then issue out the whole lab. So what I've done here at this one, I run the whole thing, and when you get to this line, it says, hey, run the whole work. This is now taking me, I don't know what that is. It will then take an hour and a half to install all those machines and all those components from there, right? Then, typically we're here, hey, we're going to checkpoint all the VMs in there. So I'm going to run a snapshot on all the machines. So if I need to revert, oh, that's easy. I've already done all that work to build the machines into an empty shell, and then we go from there. Hey, now we're going to install Windows features. Hey, this kind of looks familiar. We've seen this before, and actually I'm going to Control-C again, right? And so I'm going to run this, which will then on this app server, I'm going to install all these, the RSAT tools and, which other components do we need that we're going to then need later on. Hey, when you're finally done, reboot that machine. Okay, let's keep on going. We're going to take the next machine, right? We're going to get that machine, install these services. So we've done our checkpoint so that we can then repeat this other process later on and revert from there. This is Windows features in there in the box, but here's install application that we used above, right? So here's the computer we're going to run it on. Here's the installer we're going to run, and then what are we going to execute? Boom, from there. And then any install arguments before. So that installation function at the top is now a wrapper that allows me to run additional applications on the lab itself. And then we're finally done. Hey, we're going to run install. This is where we saw about booting those ISOs as well. And I'm trying to get it from there. So it's I'm trying to run through it really fast, but the idea is that you can get pretty complicated as far as what that definition looks like. You start off pretty small, you define the machines. Typically you want to do a snapshot and you checkpoint the machines. You do a bunch of other work, and then you snapshot again and then go from there. And then you get a file invoking commands. You could just say, hey, we already saw some of that. but you can do any script block you want. So you can, anything that you already know about, you can do. Mounting your ISOs, we kind of talked about, hey, at this point, hey, mount this ISO on that remote machine, and then I can then invoke a command using that ISO, right? And then give me a detailed version of what that summary looks like. That's all on-prem. We've shown all that on-prem. There's no reason why we can't do the exact same thing. Here we are. What changed between define the lab definition and the other one? It said Hyper-V, and now we're going to say Azure. Well, there you go. I can, at its most core piece, that's all it takes to convert your lab. I wrote all this big stuff and make it in Azure. All right, well, I'm going to change that line at the top, and now this will deploy the whole thing up into Azure. All the same things required and happen. So this doesn't really look like anything different than we just saw. Hey, defining a lab definition. Hey, my root DC is there. All of it's the same. So that's one of the great things about this is that it is fairly transportable, right? I can move it to another, and it's just what's the hyper thing. Now, granted, some of the other stuff comes along where it only exists in Azure at that point. Hey, you have to define a location and some of those other things. But ultimately, a lot of the logic that you're going to need to work with, it's all there. It's all the same, right? And why did I show you before? Where's that other screen? I showed you before, actually, this is the computer I want. I showed you before, looking at the local PC, what does it look like on disk when you go from here? You have lab sources, you have the VMs themselves. Well, what's going to happen when you do this Azure deployment? It's going to create a resource group of the lab itself. But then it also creates this other thing up there, the top, automated lab sources. Well, this is going to look pretty familiar because we come in here, it's going to create a storage account. You've got to be able to access those files. So in Azure, it wants you to create a storage account. Nope, file storages. Hey, lab sources. And let's go browse that lab source. This looks pretty familiar, right? And so all of that stuff comes along free, not like free, but it will deploy that for you. If you don't already have it, it says, hey, I need all this, and we'll start copying all that stuff up. So when you deploy your first version of an Azure lab, it's going to take a lot longer, right? Because it's got to do all that work, but it's completely transparent at that point. It's phenomenal, right? So, let's go back to that machine. So let's go back to that resource group. What do we get from the Azure lab, right? This looks kind of, well, what did this look like? We kind of talked about, we deployed just a domain controller and a file server. So we got all the pieces. It's going to create the NIC for me. It's going to create the VM itself for me. It's going to create the extra OS disk from there. It's going to do all that for you. It will also create the default network security group. It will give you a public IP to it. It will do all that for you. All that is in box. You can gut in and change a bunch of those features, but it comes for free. And that's why, we work in the MVP model, minimum viable product. I got a product working and I can get this operational, right? And so as I said just before, hey, I ran this. I ran some extra code to open up that NSG so I can connect to it from anywhere in the world. And boom, now I have a domain controller on the internet that anybody can talk to. Similarly here, and so, yeah, so this one took, when I ran this one, hey, there it was, just a cloud lab, one PC, that was the random PC I gave, and it was a domain controller, file server, web server, and there, it took an hour. Similarly, this isn't anything complicated. This is completely something that you can do, and it went from there. So I wanted to say, come back to the last part, is that if you're looking at the docs and you're working a bunch of stuff, you're like, how do I do this? And so they've done a great job putting it a bunch together, but also it's community driven and it meets their need. But if there's a need that you have that's beyond that, well, you can add to that. And that's also where somebody from the community that is in the room as well has decided, you know what, hey, I want to add some additional utilities to it. I'm going to create a couple functions that allow you to then create your own custom roles, right? To help you build new custom roles, to have it do beyond where it is. You say, hey, I want it to do this. We kind of talked about before, what are the roles that are available to you? Not that one. Here are the custom roles that are available to you, just out of the box, right? But that's what the generified version. But most likely when you're deploying it, you're gonna need your own different roles and you go from there. So if you simply look up automated lab, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Stevie's done a good job at this point documenting how to add onto that. And that was written so that he can use Automated Lab for his own purpose. And I think you should do the same thing to take Automated Lab and expand it upon what you can do with it. And so that's pretty much the rest of my questions and comments. And thank you, and don't forget your survey. Question.
I probably could, but why shouldn't I use this to deploy production stuff?
It is a predefined framework, and most likely your production won't meet all of these requirements, and it's not for that purpose, right? And so it has pre-canned code to allow you to build into a pre-canned environment, but most likely your production is not going to be that, right? All of those security rules, or even Raymond Maven. Yeah, so his response then is that, hey, people have done it, but they've done it pretty much in air-gapped environments where they're not really in that form, and they want to be self-contained, right? And so I don't know any even production environment. You can use some of the lessons here. You could probably even just steal the code going, hey, how do I install software? And you can do that. But also, this isn't the only product out there that can do that. But this is a framework that we understand as PowerShell junkies to get that, to achieve that goal. So that's where we go from there. So thank you. Good question. Thank you. All right. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great day.